Welcome to episode 7 of Rail Talk. I'm still here in this Saratoga Airbnb, so it must be soon after last week's episode, which was, I think, our Eclipse episode. But this one's going to be pretty damn good as well. We got Lisa Lazarus coming up. My name is Joe Bianca. I'm an ownership at Joe Bianca. I gotta say this name more strongly. I breeze through it. Joe Bianca, ownership advisor for West Point Thoroughbreds. And John and Patty, you guys gotta stop waking me up early in the morning with all of these music references and movie references that are like 30 years before my time. I love you both to pieces, but that's getting rough.
Oh, you think I'm going to cry just like you did last week, Joe?
Oh.
That was so sad.
Oh, that's wrong. It's wrong.
That's true. That's true. You do need your beauty sleep. This is Jonathan Green, general manager of DJ Stable. And Joe, you had quite a trek out to Virginia this weekend.
Yeah, I went down to Colonial Downs just for the day, and it was a little dicey getting back, but we'll get into it. And John, I've seen you cry for a lot less. Let's be real.
No, there's no question about that.
Rail Talk is brought to you by the Green Group. Shout out to our friends at the Green Group, Len and John and Carlene and Donna and the whole team. They do a great job. You know, it's not too early to think about your 2024 taxes, especially with all the horse buying and horse trading that's going on right now. I get a lot of questions from West Point partners about the tax benefits. And I always say to them, I got the guy. I'm not a tax expert, but I know one in the industry. Len Green is the preeminent one in this business. We love Len, we love John, and they do a great job. And it was great to see you guys win a bunch of races at Colonial on Saturday, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But in the meantime, go see Len, talk to Len. He can hook you up with the most savings possible for your 2024 taxes. If you're not using Len in the Green Group, you're losing money. So go see them at greenco.com. Book your consultation. We'd like to welcome our next guest to the Rail Talk hot seat. It's the CEO of the Horseracing Integrity and Safety Authority, Lisa Lazarus. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
We're super excited to have you. Obviously, it's a very busy time for you. I mean, I feel like it's been a busy time for you for a while
Sure.
now, but it's especially a busy time now because of the implementation of the new ADMC program and a lot of the new rules that happened this summer, basically. So just give us, it's a broad question to start, but just give us a state of the union in terms of what you wanted to implement, what still might be coming, and just the response you've gotten from the racing community.
So, we rolled out the anti-doping medication control program on May 22nd. It was a massive logistical undertaking, and I'm really pleased with the way that it's rolled out, just given the challenge. A lot of people sometimes say, well, why didn't you take longer, et cetera? And the answer is that we weren't given that option. Congress had a deadline, and I think, we were able to meet that deadline in a responsible way. There are always things that we can do better. There are definitely some tweaks, and, we were working very closely with the laboratories, the 6 laboratories that are part of the program, to make sure that the harmonization is working and that results are coming back quicker. Results have not been at the outset as quick as we'd like, but we're definitely improving on that, and I expect that to be resolved very soon. And the program is doing what it's supposed to do. I mean, one thing that I think is probably worth mentioning is, the program was created to be quite harsh on what we call banned substances or doping substances, but to be very reasonable and rational when it comes to medication overages. So a lot of people don't realize that, if you have a first-time bute overage, it's just a $500 fine. There's no suspension, there's no days, there's no provisional suspension. But if your horse has a doping substance in its system, then it's more severe, and that's the reason. That's what we're trying to accomplish, basically.
And Lisa, one of the things that I know a lot of owners and trainers have been, concerned about is, let's say that something accidentally happens. I get a contamination, with regard to my horse. How can we as an industry address that? Because I'm nervous as an owner that maybe one of the grooms in employment for my trainer has a salon pause patch on, or urinates in the stall and is on a medication, and then that therefore transfers to the horse. How do we know that a contamination is just that, a contamination versus an overage?
So like a lot of thought and discussion was given to how to approach that issue in the program. And I think we approach it effectively in two different ways. One is we have an atypical findings policy, which means that we have 27 substances that if they're detected in a horse's system, it goes through a different path. And the reason is that those substances are identified as those that are more likely than not to be contaminants. What happens is that the trainer gets, or the responsible person gets a letter saying, there's an atypical finding in your horse's sample, please help us essentially to figure out what caused it, and if it's bedding, if it's something else, if it's feed, give us the information so we can discern together whether or not it actually was contamination. And if it was, and the case gets dropped and nobody ever knows about it. And actually, we've already notified 15 cases in our program of atypical findings. That's not public because we don't make those cases public. Obviously anonymized and just giving a round number is not an issue. But, one of the promises of that program is that we don't actually disclose if you've been notified of an atypical finding. So 15 of those cases that are going through that separate process. And the other way is to set reasonable screening limits, and the intention behind our program is not to capture small amounts that are likely to be contamination, but to actually, only capture reasonable levels that we believe, we're either irresponsibility or intentionally in the horse's system.
I want to talk a little bit about the provisional suspension process that we've seen in the early stages. John and I spoke about it when a couple of different trainers got 2-year provisional suspensions. Ray Handles was reversed, as I believe the other ones have not been yet, but I might be wrong on that. Let's just talk about the process, because there's been a lot of inflammatory rhetoric, I think, from some of the lawyers, for some of the trainers, talking about how arduous a process it is. It seemed to be pretty expedited, especially by racing standards. So just can you walk us through what happens when there's a provisional suspension, how quickly someone can file an appeal, how costly that is, and just what goes on in that process?
Sure. Well, let me start by just correcting a little bit of misinformation. So first of all, no one's had a suspension of 2 years, a personal suspension of 2 years. The sanctions for banned substances set forth a penalty of up to 2 years. That only is decided by the arbitrator once it actually goes to a final hearing. The sort of rationale behind a provisional suspension is that if there's a positive test for a doping substance in a horse, we believe the risk to the industry, to the trainers who are competing fairly, to the gambling public is too high to allow that trainer to continue to race his or her horses during the pendency of the case. It's more analogous like administrative leave, when you think an employee's done something wrong, you're not sure, but you need to take them out of the work environment while you investigate. Now, there are some important kind of differences between how these are imposed. So if you have a banned substance, it's just one substance in one horse, you have the right to ask that the suspension be delayed until your B sample comes back. That option isn't available if you have more than one horse with the same substance, because that creates just too high of a risk to, again, the trainers who are completely clean and basically the public, the integrity of the sport. Now, you're entitled to a hearing almost immediately, like within a few days if you request it. I think there's been a lot of misinformation out there about, trainers not getting quick hearings. Ultimately, it's up to the lawyer and to the responsible person themselves as to how quickly they want a hearing. And, so far, most, if not all, have opted to have a little bit more time to investigate their case so they can mount the best defense possible. And of course, we're going to always give the responsible person that option. Since it's their defense, we want them to feel like they have whatever they need, whatever time they need to mount a proper defense.
Sorry, John, I just want to ask a quick follow-up on that, because, the comparison to administrative leave, I think one of the issues that people have with the provisional suspension is that it's very, very hard to wind down and, empty out barns. So, what kind of leeway is there with that? I assume people that have provisional suspensions, you're not coming in and, making them move out of the horses.
Not at all. So a couple things. One is you don't have to scratch any of your horses if they were entered on the overnight. So that's one. The second is you don't have to move your horses. You just can't breeze or race a horse once you've been provisionally suspended until it's either lifted or there's a final decision. And one other thing I want to correct is the Ray Handel case, it was not reversed. There's a lot of misinformation about that as well. What happened was that, again, what I said earlier is the calculus is that the risk is too high to the public and to the trainers that are competing fairly to allow that trainer to continue to run horses. In Ray Handel's case, his lawyer immediately presented information to HIWU that was exculpatory, that essentially gave HIWU the view that he had a good chance, a reasonable chance of succeeding on the merits. So then the risk became too high to keep him suspended. So the suspension was lifted, but the case is still very much alive and going through the process. It's just that he's not suspended during the pendency of the case.
Got it. Okay. No, thank you. Because you're right. There's a lot of misinformation, and sometimes we're reporting it because we think that it's actually factual, which is one of the reasons why we wanted you on the show. So we appreciate it. Recently, Lisa, there's been some letters to the editors. One by an owner of the trainer who is under investigation. Another is by an attorney, who represents a trainer. And there's a lot. I'm not going to go through it, line by line, but there's a lot of speculation and legalese going back and forth through this. Do you want to address either one of those or both of them?
Sure. So, one difficulty is that, as you can imagine, there's kind of a stable, excuse the pun, of equine lawyers who have been handling these types of cases for a long time, right? And they're very used to the racing commission system. Okay. So now those same lawyers are being faced with a different system. And unfortunately, many of them are not becoming really familiar with the rules before they make statements or argue on behalf of their clients. I read something today in one of I can't remember exactly where I read it, but suggesting that owners don't have the right to be heard if their horse is suspended. That is categorically false. That lawyer obviously didn't read the rules, which is really unfortunate for his client. So an owner has the same right to request a B sample. So even if the trainer says, I don't want the B sample, the owner can still request it. The owner has a right to provisional hearing the same way that a trainer does. The owner has the right to intervene in the final hearing to be heard on the issue of whether or not his horse should be suspended. So all of the same rights afforded to trainers are afforded to owners, because of course it is a very important right that owners should have. They should absolutely have due process because their ownership in their horse is just as important as the trainer's rights. So that is just completely wrong. I have no idea where that lawyer got that information, but it certainly wasn't from the rule book.
And Lisa, just as a follow-up, in that same letter, he talks about, if you buy a horse that was a weanling and it was given, viewed at the time, and then, it stays in the system and the horse wins as a 2-year-old.
It's just all it's actually funny to me. It would be funny if it wasn't sad for the clients that he represents. Completely false. So first of all, there's only one substance that would result in a horse being suspended for its life, and that's bisphosphonates. That's only if they've been administered after May 22nd. So if your horse got bisphosphonates before May 22nd, the effective date of the anti-doping program, that's not an issue. We obviously are not going to penalize someone for something that happened before the effective date. The other issue that article I think addresses is critical of the fact that there are different time frames for how long a horse is suspended based on the substance that was detected. So first of all, the presumptive time frame for horses to be suspended for a banned substance is 2 months from the date of sample collection. That's the most typical. That's if there's no specific time period mentioned in the rules, that's the presumptive time period. That could be extended if there's some really serious aggravating factors around neglect or abuse or whatever. And the other substances, like an anabolic steroid, it's a longer period of time because science has shown that the effects of an anabolic steroid will stay in a horse's system beyond a couple months. It can be 6 months, 12 months. So there's a different time frame so that essentially the trainers who are following the rules, who HISA needs to protect, are not competing against a horse that had an advantage that it shouldn't have had.
I think you guys have gotten criticized both ways on a certain issue, which is transparency and flexibility. Mm-hmm. I think that there have been a lot of people who have wrongly said that this is like a top-down edict program, mm-hmm. which it's not, because you guys have been willing to listen and adjust. I think there are some other people who have criticized you from the other way and said that if you adjust it too much and you're too flexible, then there's really no hard set of rules for people to follow and stick by. So just what's been your experience so far in terms of balancing balancing that in terms of taking, valuable insight from people who are on the ground every morning, but also having a core set of principles and rules that stay in place?
I mean, you've identified a really key issue. Our mandate is to protect the safety and integrity of horses. We've got to do that without destroying the essence of horse racing and without destroying or impeding anyone's rights for due process, et cetera. And finding that balance is complicated. We've spent a ton of time stress testing the rules, debating the rules, talking about sanctions before it was launched with a number of different focus groups, including horsemen's groups, et cetera. Now, once you put those rules into practice, it's a whole different world, right? I mean, everyone told us we wouldn't find any banned substances. So when we now have like almost 30 positives of banned substances, the impact of that is much more significant. And the answer to your question is, we have a system that we believe in, that is a correct system. But some of the nuances of it, once you actually put them in practice, don't always work. And we are very happy to concede when something doesn't work, when a rule is a bad rule. And one of the things I've said is we will change as many times as we need to if a rule is a bad rule. We will not stand on ceremony. But that's not to make things better or worse for any particular stakeholder group. It's just to address issues that come up. No one's ever, I know people think, everyone's, commissions have had anti-doping programs forever. No one has ever had a national anti-doping program in racing. And you can't even fathom the enormity of that project and all of the logistics and all the considerations. And so it's not surprising to me that a couple of things have come up that we just didn't get right, and we need to correct them.
Right. And Lisa, one of the things that you guys have unveiled, especially this, I guess, recently in the past week or so, is the HIWU app. And going through, you can see, who's under appeal and what some of the pending violation matters are, et cetera, et cetera. And that's great because it basically shows you, who in the industry is under review. When I went through that list and I compared it to my mental list of people that, trainers that I would say I think are taking an edge, it doesn't jibe. There's really none of the guys or women who are on that list right now are ones that I would say this person is taking an edge or cheating. How do we catch them?
So a couple of things. One is everyone has a different view on that, right? So that's very much, I think, from where you sit in your perspective. When it comes to post-race tests and out of competition and work tests, it's science. It's super simple. The sample goes to the lab tests the sample, it comes back positive or negative. There's no judgment involved, there's no opinion involved, it's black or white. Now, obviously, that's not going to catch everything. And just like we saw with, for example, the Service and Navarro cases, you may need other tools at your disposal. One of the things that I think is really terrific and groundbreaking about HISA's ADMC program is that we have a really robust investigative team. And they are working, led by Sean Richards, who is the FBI agent who basically built the Service and Navarro cases. He's got a number of agents working for him, other investigators, along with Sean Lohr, who came from the CHRB. And they are working on some long-term investigations, but those are going to take a little bit longer because, of course, we only launched a couple months ago, and those are not simply, those can't be approached the same way that you approach a post-race test.
And I know Joe, sorry, one more follow-up. I know you have a tips hotline also. Mm-hmm. Has that been, used? Has it been utilized a lot? Have you been getting a lot of tips on certain trainers that
So I don't personally review that line, but I do hear from the investigations team that it's very heavily used, and they've got a lot of good information has come through that tip line.
In that vein, in terms of investigation, I think that this is one of the things that we've all banged the drum about for a while is that you can't just catch cheaters with drug testing. Even really robust, very well organized drug testing, which I think this program is, surveillance is a big part of it as well. And that's part of the reason that Service in Navarro ended up entangled. First of all, what's the scope of your authority to do surveillance on the back stretches? And then what has it been like in practice, and what do you hope to accomplish in that vein?
So, the scope of our authority is that we can essentially investigate anything that involves the care of a covered horse, the safety and integrity of a covered horse. And so essentially, like, our rules follow the horse. And the investigators, pursue that very carefully, balancing, obviously, people's rights to privacy, et cetera. But we do have the authority under the Act to pursue whatever is necessary to determine whether or not a covered horse is either receiving banned or substances or being mistreated. And so, I'm not, that, as you can imagine, that team needs to act really independently. I'm actually not even privy to the people they're investigating. There's really a sort of independence to HIWU that separates us from HISA. That's the way the Act kind of created the system. But I do know that, they're working hard and that they believe, they will be able to uncover certain issues that need to be addressed.
Lisa, my final question is, if you had one thing to say to the industry now that you've been doing this for a little while, what's your message? My message is,
this is for all of the trainers and owners who compete cleanly, which in my view is the vast, vast majority. Call it 98%. I don't know what that number is, but I imagine it's somewhere around there. And this is, I know a lot of folks are worried about their own rights, worried about contamination, worried about being charged when they didn't actually do. And what I want to say is, I think we've built a really good system to protect against the majority of that happening. You can't foresee every situation, but the rationale of the program is in place to basically protect the clean trainer, the trainer who's following the rules. And ultimately, over time, I think the industry will come to trust that promise, and will come to see that actually, our rules are not, as crazy like some people say, and our rules are actually there to protect the industry. And we have people to protect in terms of our covered persons, our stakeholders, or doing everything right. But we also have the legacy of horse racing to protect. We have the future to protect, and the future needs a national uniform program to be successful and to be ultimately what we all want it to be.
That's a great message. Unfortunately, I have one more question, because that would have been a great place to put up here.
More questions, the better.
I guess I have a question about track safety, because that's been a big deal this year as well. We saw the rash of breakdowns and the fatalities that happened at Churchill Downs. So when something like that does happen, what is your role in terms of intervening? Like, I'm sure you can't just come in and cancel racing, but is there an advisory role that you have? What do you guys do when you see a cluster of breakdowns like we saw?
No, we do have the authority to review a racetrack's accreditation and make sure that they're doing everything they're required to do under the rules to continue to be able to hold covered races. But we also, a lot of what we do also, because when there's a situation like that, the commissions and the track tend to do a really good job investigating whether there's been any rule violations or any malfeasance. Our rule is more to come in, look at the data, look at trends, look at the track measurements, and try to see whether or not we can learn anything from those experiences, try to avoid them in the future. We're working on right now a couple of really exciting data projects that we hope are going to be really useful in sort of predicting those risks, because one great thing about HISA is that we do collect a lot of data, and now we're getting to a point where we can start to use some of that data. And so that really is more HISA's role. Of course, if there's like an emergency, we will step in, but ultimately our role is more to look at prevention and data analysis.
Yeah, just to follow up on that real quick, I think one of the big programs, I'm not sure if this is one of the things you're referring to, is the Stride Safe technology, the wearable biometric technology that can potentially detect breakdowns before they occur. What's the status of that? Is that something that you guys are involved in expanding throughout the country?
Yeah, so that is really primarily a project that Churchill Downs and a few others are working on, and we're very supportive of it. We're kind of letting them take that forward. We're looking at other other tools and other predictive, essentially technologies, including, looking at all of the data that we have currently with some of the sort of big tech companies to see whether or not we can just use that data as opposed to a wearable. But we definitely support the wearables and we'll, do anything we can to kind of help bring that to fruition.
Got it. All right. Well, Lisa Lazarus, one thing that you've done very, very well throughout this whole process is answer questions, haven't ducked an interview or a meeting. So we appreciate you coming on Rail Talk and explaining a lot of this to our audience. Hope to see you again soon.
Great. Thank you both so much. I appreciate the opportunity. And I love this podcast, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, you're definitely coming back.
Well, and you might even be able to name a horse now, Lisa. If you want to name a horse, you can name a horse. If you want to.
I'm giving that away like peppermints these
I
days.
do not think I am worthy.
How about Boss Lisa or Lisa the Boss? They're like that. So we had a big weekend, a big Saturday of racing, at least at Colonial Downs. This was the new location of the Arlington Million card. I don't know if that's going to be the location going forward, yet to be determined. But it was also, more importantly, my first visit to Colonial Downs. The star of the show was, of course, me. All the horses were all right, but it was a fun trip. But it was hotter than Hades. Virginia in the middle of August, it was 95 degrees plus humidity. But let's talk about a couple of results. Set Piece won the Arlington Million Stakes, coming from way, way back. He's a horse I always thought was a little bit of a disappointment. He's got a big closing kick, but he just never won that big race. But maybe what he wanted to do was go 1.25 miles all along. Shout out to friend of the show, Mark Cassie, winning the Beverly D with Fev Rover. She looked like a winner every step of the way and cruised home. So that's a winning year in for the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf. So she's coming around really nicely as well. In the Secretariat Stakes, unfortunately, the one of the races I was there for, Northern Invader, did not run that well. But it was the kind of day where you could excuse any kind of middling effort or, so-so effort because, damn, it was hot. Northern Invader came into the paddock pretty sweaty, and just some horses don't handle the heat. But the race was won by Gigante, who's a Steve Asmussen horse, just held off Nagarok in the shadow of the wire. Very hard horse to have at 22-1. It was that kind of weird day where there was a lot of prices and then a lot of short prices. John and DJ Stable won back-to-back races with Glider. I think we can put up the video of the winner's circle for me from me with Glider in the winner's circle, and then Bouncer won the race after that. West Point had a winner with Integration, won his debut by 6.5 lengths in the fourth race. No one has ever been in more winner's circles for horses they don't own than I was on Saturday at Colonial Downs. They might as well have put a plaque on the wall in that winner's circle. But it was a cool experience, and it was a good crowd, especially in the dining hall. And we love that turf course. John, what were your impressions from Saturday's races, other than the great success that you guys had?
Well, it was great. We're very fortunate to win not one but two races that day, especially because the race for Bouncer was supposed to be run 2 weeks prior, but it was when they had a heat index and they actually canceled racing and moved this handicap to the big racing day. Joe, I thought it was really interesting about Gigante because not only did the horse come off from last to first and win and just get there in the last couple of strides. But I don't know if you realize this, he's a Virginia bred. So it was great, that he got to show off his wares in his home state in the Commonwealth of Virginia. But also Gigante is a son of, not this time, who is standing at TaylorMade. Yeah, we went full circle for that, just for our all of our sponsors. So I was really pleased to see that horse come in at 20-1. And Fev Rover is a horse that I've honestly been tracking since she was a 2-year-old in Europe. We actually made an offer on her that was subsequently denied. And then the horse went into public auction and Farmer et al. Were smart enough to buy the horse, albeit for like over $1 million. I mean, she wasn't a cheap filly. And now she's really starting to come into her own. And she's 5 years old now. And I think that the fact that she could go gate to wire and Castellano Javier just slowed the pace down so much. I think every quarter was like 25 for the first quarter, the half, the 6 furlong mark, and he just lulled everyone to sleep. So by the time that they got to the top of the stretch, Fev Rover still had a ton of energy left and just, basically blew away from everyone else. But overall, it was a great day of racing, albeit it was so freaking hot. But as you said, but it was a phenomenal card that they put together. And Colonial Downs is one of those racetracks that 10 years ago, they weren't even in existence. And now they've kind of revolutionized and shown the way of making a really strong regional program. And I think that they put Virginia back on the map as far as a state to be reckoned with when it comes to racing.
Yeah, no, that was the biggest day in Virginia racing history. I don't think they had ever had a grade 1 at that track, much less 2, and then another grade 2 on top of it. So yeah, it was a fabulous day of racing, and I just like that turf course better than Churchill's. I think it's more akin, it's closer to the Arlington turf course, which is where these races should be being run in the first place. But
yeah. And Joe, I know you were there, so I wonder what your feeling was. But from TV, watching it on the computer, it looked pristine. I mean, the turf course looked almost like the putting greens at Augusta. I mean, it was just that perfect. And it wasn't like a painted, like some racetracks on big days that kind of paint their turf course to make it look green. That really looked like it was strong Bermuda grass. And I know that the horse that we ran on the turf, Javier came back and said, wow, he was really took to this course.
And it's a better friendly track too. They have a 12% takeout for the pick 5. So I'm always happy to see tracks like that get in the spotlight, if even just for a day. They do have one more big card later in the meet at the Virginia Derby card. So I think that's in mid-September or so. Just one other horse I wanted to mention from the weekend, because otherwise it was a pretty slow weekend in terms of stakes races. How cool is Casa Creed, man? Like he is one of my favorite horses in training. It's just nails. Just shows up every time, 6 furlongs, a mile, and for whatever reason, he's almost never favored. There's always like somebody else, like Caravel was favored over him in the Jaipur. Annapolis was favored over him on Saturday, even though Casa Creed had just beaten Annapolis in the prep for that race. So he's just one of those horses that never quite gets the respect that I think he deserves. Same thing for his sire, Jimmy Creed, who I think is one of the more underrated stallions in the entire world. But I just wanted to give a hat tip to Casa Creed, who's been a great horse for Mike Francesa, de Pope, the sports pope, Mike Francesa and Lee Einseidler and Bill Mott and Luis Saez. It's super nice horse. And we love those horses that are just so hardy, just show up every time with a big time effort. So shout out to Casa Creed. Hope to see him. If I could book a future on him in the Breeders' Cup Mile, I would do that right now, because he probably would be like 8 or 10 to 1, because we're probably expecting.
He probably would, because Cody's Wish will be the favorite.
Well, the turf mile. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I think assuming that there's probably going to be a bunch of good Euros, I feel like you're probably going to be able to get 8 or 10 to 1 on him. But I love him. One of my favorite horses in training. Rail Talk is sponsored by Fasig-Tipton. We talked last week about the booming success of the Fasig-Tipton Saratoga sale, and then a week before that, we were on the grounds as they were prepping for the Fasig Saratoga sale. So it's been all Fasig all the time. And that continued the last 2 days with the Fasig-Tipton New York bred yearling sale. The first session was last night. The second session just wrapped up today. We're recording this on Monday. It was, it's not quite the social event that the select yearling sale is, but it was still a good crowd there last night. And I love that nighttime atmosphere. They sold a lot of really nice horses. West Point, I believe we bought 3, unless we bought one in between when I started that sentence and now. I think which can happen with West Point, and we're really excited about the 3 we got. We got a War of Will colt, a Laoban colt, and a Daredevil filly. So we're really excited about those 3. And the New York bred program is obviously super lucrative. And John, you can speak to this better than me. The Fasig Saratoga Select sale grows every year, but that's been established for a long time. The New York bred sale has become its own thing. Can you talk about the growth that you've seen in that sale?
Joe, you're exactly right. And growth not only in amount of money spent on New York breds, but just in the number of horses that have been entered into this particular Fasig-Tipton Saratoga sale. I don't know if you realize, but they actually built a new barn for TaylorMade at Fasig-Tipton. And then for this sale, just for the New York bred sale, they had so many horses that wanted to sell there. They actually put up temporary stalls. They put tents up with temporary stalls to accommodate the additional, I think it was 30 something horses that wanted to be sold at that sale. So the sale is growing in leaps and bounds. The numbers are almost about the same as they were last year, Joe, again, subject to the last couple of horses going through the ring. But last year, the New York breds on average brought 107,000. And this year, After the first day was over, they averaged 113,000. They averaged a little bit under 100,000 so far today. So the averages are going to be roughly about the same, and the medians are going to be roughly about the same, somewhere around $74,000, $75,000, which shows you that if you bring a good, solid New York bred to that sale, you're going to walk away with some cash, because most of the stallions in New York aren't standing for a ton of money. So it's a great return on investment if you breed to Central Banker for 7,500, or when Leoban was up here, or Salamini. There's a really good crop of stallions in New York, and if you beget a good New York bred horse, you're going to get some money for it.
Another story we want to mention that we've discussed this before in past podcast lives. This has been a topic of discussion for a while now, which is the Preakness potentially moving to accommodate the Preakness. Basically, because, the Belmont does just fine being 5 weeks after the Kentucky Derby. Preakness has suffered more and more in recent years, being in that middle jewel position 2 weeks after the Derby, 3 weeks before the Preakness. A lot of times, Mage was the only horse this year that ran in both the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness. We saw Rich Strike pass on the Preakness as the Derby winner. I think that was the real seismic shift in terms of the way people looked at the Triple Crown spacing. So First Racing has announced that they're giving strong consideration to moving the date of the Preakness, so it's run 4 weeks after the Kentucky Derby. Now, the problem is Belmont and Naira do not seem on board with this. So we might get to a point where there is no more Triple Crown, because it's like physically impossible for the horses to run in all 3 races. This is going to be a little bit of a game of chicken, I think, in the next couple of years. I just want to read a quote from Aidan Butler, who's the CEO of First Racing. He said, "We've discussed it internally and believe it's in the best interest of horses and horse safety to move the race 4 weeks after the Kentucky Derby. This would give horses more time to recover between races to be able to run in the Preakness. Horse safety is more important than tradition. Naira is aware and considering how this would impact the Belmont. Stay tuned." I mean, John, that is such bullshit, my man. Like, that is like,
you have don't play that.
Can we have the siren go off for that? Because it's like, not to say that Aidan Butler and First Racing don't care about horse safety, but that is not the impetus for this move. You want a better field and a more stacked race for the Preakness. But John, we haven't spoken about this in a while. Maybe your opinions have changed. I felt like we were both kind of traditionalists on this thing. Where are you at now with switching the Triple Crown's spacing?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Previously, I was all in favor of keeping things as is, because there is so much gravitas and so much importance on the Triple Crown, and the fact that there hadn't been one for so many years, for decades, and now we've gotten a couple, not in a row, but a couple over the past couple of years. So we've been a little spoiled. But at the end of the day, breeders like to have horses that have as many Grade 1 wins as possible. Especially on the dirt, and the Derby is in itself its own island. It's a standalone. The Preakness we talked about a couple of shows ago, and all the stallion prospects that came out of the Preakness. So obviously, it is a race that people respect. But for the recent times, the Preakness has been the redheaded stepchild of the Triple Crown. People just not only don't care, they, like you said, they've been skipping it. And I think when COVID hit and the entire Triple Crown calendar got turned upside down, I think that's when people started to see, maybe we should, move this thing around a little bit, because if we can get a better, group of horses running here, it only benefits us, for overall. And Joe, I remember we talked about this a couple of years ago, where you and I brought up the idea at the time of the Preakness maybe being downgraded. And not being a Grade 1 race, because it just wasn't getting the Grade 1 caliber horses for the most part that were coming in. And our third host at the time scoffed at that. But if you look at it, if you took the name of Preakness off of that, and you said, here are the horses that are competing in it, it is not a legitimate Grade 1 compared to, the Derby, the Belmont, the Jim Dandy, the Breeders' Cup races. It just doesn't compare to those. And to me, as a purist, Grade 1s have to be that great. They have to be that difficult of a race to win. Otherwise, they lose their value. So I think that it's a necessary move. As much as I don't want to see it happen, as a purist, I think it's going to happen, because there's really nothing keeping them together. There's no agreement that the that Churchill and First and Naira have to stay together in that order, in that sequence of events. And really, it's kind of turning into an every man for himself at this point. So I don't blame, First for doing this and Stern Group for doing this, but I really don't want it to happen. I think it's inevitable. I think
I agree. And I think that they're kind of trying to put the early pressure on Naira, because like Naira's defense has been all along, like, we're traditionalists. We don't want to mess with the Triple Crown. But if the Preakness moves to 4 weeks after the Derby and you stay where you are, you're messing with the Triple Crown. Like, obviously the First Racing made the move, but if you care that much about the Triple Crown and they do that, then you got to move too, because there's absolutely no way anybody's going to run in all three races. And I think it's also unfortunate. I've made this point before. I think it's also a little bit unfortunately kowtowing to trainers who do not want to run their horses more than 4, 5, maybe, God, heaven forbid, 6 times a year. Like that to me is kind of rewarding, is rewarding that, I'm not going to say cowardice, but like, lack of competitive fire, if you don't want to run your horses more than 4 times a year. But the question for me, I think, and then we'll see, because like you said, I think this is happening. If we do 4 weeks, 4 weeks, 4 weeks, is the public still going to care and be able to have their attention as transfixed as it is by the Triple Crown? Because that's one of the nice things about the Triple Crown. It's 3 races, 5 weeks. I think asking the public to follow horse racing for an 8-week period, I think, we'll see. Well, I'll just be interested when this does happen, because it is going to happen, what the TV ratings are going to be like. But yeah.
Right. And Joe, just a question for you. I'm curious about your opinion. So let's say that this all gets turned upside down and that the Triple Crown gets elongated as far as on the calendar goes. And there's going to be ramifications as far as what other races get bumped because of that, or get moved or eliminated altogether. If they're going to make the calendar change, if Naira makes the calendar change and decides that they, are going to keep it 4 weeks after the Preakness, do they change the distance? Because nobody in the breeding industry wants to have a 1.5 miles. They're not breeding for 1.5 miles. They don't want to have stallion prospects that run 1.5 miles. Do they cut it back at that point? Since they're making a change, they might as well pull the whole Band-Aid off.
I think that's going to be the next topic, is like the horses are too fragile to run 1.5 miles, and it's such an antiquated distance, which the latter part is definitely true. But it's supposed to be different. Like, this is my whole problem, and I don't want to come off as like a stodgy traditionalist, but the Triple Crown is supposed to be different from the rest of the racing calendar and the rest of the distances that we normally run. It's supposed to be an extraordinary test. If it was just like everything else, it wouldn't be as special, and there are plenty of other races out there that the public would never, ever in a million years care about. This is sold and marketed to the public as the test of the champion. That's the Belmont specifically, but this is the test of the champion. These 3 races together, that's the only reason that have only been 13 horses to do it in history, because it's supposed to be difficult. It's supposed to be unique. But this is the way of the world now, John. Rail Talk is sponsored by TaylorMade Sales, TaylorMade Stallions as well. The whole TaylorMade umbrella, hand in hand with Rail Talk. We saw the Not This Timeshare sell at Fasig-Tipton, Saratoga. They've had a bunch of horses go through the ring. Obviously, the $4 million Curlin Beholder. You can always hang your hat on having sold that horse. They had a bunch of success throughout the rest of that sale and the New York Bred sale. And they got a bunch of entries coming up for some of the other sales, John. What have you seen?
Well, Joe, you bring up the fact that they sold the $4 million yearling at the Saratoga sale. I just saw, a press release that said that was TaylorMade's 59th sale topper. 59 times they've rung the bell as having the best and most expensive horse at a sale. That just blew my mind. That's like the New York Yankees of consigners as far as that goes. And then, they roll right into they never sleep. They roll right into from the select yearling sale to the New York Bred yearling sale, and now to the digital Horses of Racing Age sale that'll be going on in about 10 days or so, where, again, they have the most horses entered out of any consigner. So the TaylorMade group is just kicking ass and taking names and then rolling into the next sale and kicking ass and taking more names. Hats off to TaylorMade. Just one more shout out, Joe, if you don't mind, just indulge me for a minute. But ironically enough, 2 former trainers of ours are on the cusp of major milestones. John's service is at 1,999 career victories. That John won the Kentucky Oaks with Catherine Sophia, won the Derby with Smarty Jones, and won a Breeders' Cup as well with a filly named Jaywalk. So congratulations to John's service in advance of getting your 2,000th victory. I'm excited for him. And then Joe Orsino actually got his 2,000th victory because he won it as very typically in a dead heat. So some people would say he's got 1,999 and a half wins. Some people will say 2,000 wins. But Joe Orsino won his 2,000th career race with a 20-1 shot. Lord Etter Stark, the 9th race at Gulfstream. Joe had 7 different Grade 1 winners, won the Preakness with Red Bullet, and the Breeders' Cup with Macho Uno and Perfect Sting. 2 gentlemen. 2 absolutely phenomenal trainers, and I consider them both friends of mine. They've taught me a tremendous amount of the industry, and I just can't thank them enough for everything they've done for me and for our family. And I'm so happy that both of them are on 2,000 victories. Congratulations, guys!
Well-deserved milestones. 2 great guys, like you said, and we're always in favor on this show of Joe and John's success.
Very good. I like what you did there. I see what you did there, Joe.
All right, so that's going to do it for this edition, episode 7 of Rail Talk. Stay tuned also later this week for another breakaway Rail Talk. Love John's first episode. I'm going to be doing the next one, so be on the lookout for that. In the meantime, I want to thank Lisa Lazarus for coming on. Always a good guest, and we look forward to having her again on in the future. Thank my buddy John Green to this side of me. Our producer, Patty Wolf. Our associate producers, Anthony LaRocca, Aaliyah LaRocca, and Nathan Wilkinson. And most of all, thanks to you, I guess the sponsors too, Fasig-Tipton, TaylorMade, and the Green Group. But most of all, you, the listeners and the viewers, we appreciate you tuning in. We'll see you soon.